Hello and welcome back to Thoughts Per Chapter, Birth of a Killer Edition. Last chapter, Larten and Verhorsten had arrived safely at work to be tortured. This chapter, we're going to be reading more about them being tortured at work. Fun times! It's mentioned that Larten would have loved to have talked to Ver to pass the time, but if Traz caught them talking, he would whip them until they drew blood. Quote, there was a rumour that he'd once cut out a girl's tongue and kept it in his wallet. I don't think that's legal tender, Traz. We get this image of this dirty, smoky industry where the children are coughing, rubbing dirt from their eyes. Larten could never get the taste of smoke out of his mouth. Even in his dreams, his tongue was heavy with soot. This is some prime Dickens level stuff. We also learn how tragic it is that Larten's father didn't want to send the boys to the factory because that's where he grew up, and he knows just how terrible they get treated there, but it's the only place offering, quote, halfway decent wages, so they have to. There's also this forced self-inflicted pain element to things, because in order to work efficiently, Larten needs to make sure that the fire underneath his vat is raging hot. So you get the impression that this is going to be doing damage on a psychological level as well. In this chapter we get the first signs of danger, of potential change, in the form of the owners coming to inspect the facilities. It's mentioned that after a visit from the owners, Traz usually drinks and gets even worse with his beatings. Just an all-around Nobel Peace Prize winner, this chap. So we have Chekhov's gun loaded safely under the table at this point. Larten prayed while he worked, begging a variety of gods to keep Traz away from their vats. I do have to wonder what gods Larten would be praying to at this point. Praying as a kid for things not to happen is of course very standard in modern day society, but not knowing exactly where Larten comes from and not knowing what the dominating religion where he is would be, you have to wonder which gods he's praying to, right? If it was some form of Christianity, it wouldn't be gods, right? I guess it could just be the general, please any gods who might be listening, you know, that kind of a thing. Perhaps the vampire gods might overhear. If they did, they're kind of fucking cruel, because they sent Chaz to him anyway. Ah yeah, next line. Though Larten wasn't religious, he figured there was no harm in covering all the angles when trouble was in the air. Okay. You get this tragic picture of the kids trying to dunk their cocoons as fast as they can, when they hear Traz being angry, but the problem is that if they do them too fast, it's not going to yield a proper silky harvest, or however it works. And you find this in modern day toxic working environments too, telling workers to go faster and punishing them if they don't, even though the quality of the work will dip if they do, and they will be punished if the quality of their work dips. Raise your hand if you've been in that situation. Sorry, I'm raising my hand. You get this image of Traz prowling through the factory like a bear, just waiting for someone to slip up so that he can attack them. When a girl falters, he grabs her hair. Quote, she was new to the team and had made the mistake of not cutting it short. I mean, I've already made several examples of how cruel this workplace environment is, but come on. There is a slightly weird cartoony comedy to him threatening to bite off her nose, though. Also, I think that might be a reference to Gerfatif later on. Maybe Gerfatif is a descendant of Traz. Fan theory. Cirque du Freak fan theory. Is Gerfatif a descendant of Traz? Stick it on a thumbnail. Sell it for thousands of views. Oh, here we go. It would have been funny if anyone else had made such a ludicrous threat, but Traz had bitten off more than one nose in his time. A good number of ears, too. And they all knew he meant it. Nobody snickered. It still feels cartoonish to me, sorry. I guess maybe every now and again Darren the author does go, well, this is a kid's book, maybe I should add a little bit of humour in there. Well, actually, maybe I shouldn't say it's a kid's book. Young adult fiction is for all ages. That's why I'm reading it. I think it's still. I know there's a lot of conversation about how young adult fiction is still like all ages fiction. It's still good stuff. You know what I mean? I like this period of inevitable doom where Traz lets the girl go and starts prowling again. He sets his sights on a lazy tall kid, but midway through changes his tracks and starts moving towards Verhorsten. Then you've got Ver desperately trying to continue working perfectly, without acknowledging the fact that Traz is bearing down upon him. Of course, the horrifying thing is Ver doesn't even slip up, so Traz has to, find something to criticize, and he decides that Ver's water is lukewarm. Again, we've got Ver wanting to throw more logs onto the fire to fix this problem, but if he does so, he creates a bigger problem by letting the cocoons bob to the surface. Again, we have the manager wanting to quell his rage by being cruel to his workers, but actually hindering efficiency by doing so. An industry that is operated this way is a self-defeating industry. Ver doesn't rise to the bait though, so Traz decides to insult his mother instead. We are just beyond the pale here. We have just given up on all notion of pretending to be annoyed from a managerial standpoint. Ver unfortunately falls for the lies. Beg pardon, sir, but you're mistaken. My mother didn't work in an inn.
She did.
No, sir. She was a seamstress.
By day, but she had a bit extra by night.
We get mention of how, while Ver doubts it's true, he couldn't be sure.
She wasn't a pretty thing, but she was pretty good at her job,
We're told that Ver has always been able to control his temper, but when Traz leans over and whispers something in Ver's ear, which is so filthy that it's not even told to us readers, that does it. Ver lets go of the cocoons, and Traz screams at him and punches him on the left side of his head. Don't ever punch anyone in their head. It's not a good thing to do. You could kill them. There's a tragic point where Ver tries to get back to the vat to continue his job, but Traz kicks him so hard in the stomach he pukes. Of course, this only makes Traz angrier because this is, of course, Ver's fault. Nobody had ever seen Traz lose it quite this badly. I'm guessing the visit wasn't a good one. Because, of course, while Traz is a brute and he perpetuates this impossible standard of working conditions, he is also, told to do this by management who give him impossible goals to achieve. We get this image. I need to stop saying that, don't I? Traz is stomping after Ver, throwing cocoons at him as the rest of the workers gape. Eventually Ver, perhaps in reaction to the insults, maybe because the pain has driven him to insanity, or just because life has been leading him to this point, eventually Ver stands his ground. Ver tosses a cocoon back at Traz, tells him to leave him alone, and insults the foreman, and that's the death knell for our dear Ver. To the foreman, a child standing up to him is the biggest sin, let alone one that he is currently in the middle of punishing. There's this little touch where we're reminded that he's bitten off ears and noses, and that the tale of him cutting out the girl's tongue was true. Traz grabs Ver with literally one hand and dunks him, or upends him, into the boiling hot water. Quote, holding him all the way to the bottom and holding his head there with one thick, hairy, powerful hand. Here's an interesting detail. Ver kicks Traz in the face, and Traz's grip slips, and it's mentioned that Ver bobs to the surface like a cocoon. Given that I already kind of drew the comparison between Ver and cocoons in the previous chapter, I feel slightly vindicated right now. This is a direct way of showing us that Ver is literally just an asset to the industry, which is disposable, much like the silkworms themselves. To be honest, I'm surprised it took Larton this long to intervene. It's only now that he screams to let him go, although I guess Larton must feel some degree of fear himself. I wonder if when he's older, if he replays this scene in his head and curses himself for being too weak to act sooner. I don't recall there ever being a line like that in the books, but maybe we'll come across one that I've forgotten. Traz basically admits that he is aiming to kill Ver at this point. It's hinted at that even as Larton goes to make his rescue, he's already too late. When Larton threw himself forward, quote, Traz simply let go of Ver's legs, not thrashing now, and slammed a fist down on Larton's skull. Traz likes to go for the skull. He likes to beat people's heads up. He's charming like that. This almost knocks Larton unconscious, but through sheer strength of will, he keeps himself awake. Very vampire of him. Traz had expected to kill Larton by doing this. This man's out to kill 2 people today. I feel like, his bosses might have something to say about them losing more valuable assets, but, well, maybe they're not all that valuable. Kids are replaceable in this society. After all, this is the same society which encourages families to have as many children as possible just to keep them afloat. Traz actually gains a modicum of respect for Larton when Larton gets back up, and he says, "Stay down, you fool." Ver's legs are described as being as still as a crushed dog's, and Larton knew he had mere seconds in which to fish out his cousin if it wasn't already too late. And we as the reader know it probably is. But you know how it is when you see your cousin's legs dangling out the cauldron, you know, like a broken dead dog's. You think maybe there's still a chance. Maybe I should fish him out and see if I can perform some CPR. There is this nice touch where Traz knows that the boy is dead even when Larten doesn't. Verhorsten was no longer moving and no bubbles of air were trickling from his mouth. Quote, "Not being a man of a world like Traz, Larten thought there was still hope." I have to wonder if Larten has a concussion at this point, by the way. He's mentioned as gurgling happily, which leads me to think he's not entirely within his right mind. Although Darren the author does describe people as gurgling a lot in his stories. Gurgling, roaring, chuckling darkly, these are all Darrenisms. I like the little touch here that Larten found his cousins be heavier than normal, implying that maybe Larten knows his cousins' weight because they've been playing as kids, you know, lifting each other up and throwing each other around. Larten starts to cry when Ver doesn't wake up, and Traz confirms the boy's death. That's the end of another cheerful chapter of Birth of a Killer. How will Larten react? Well, I'm sure you already know, because this is of course a series dedicated to people who have already read the books and are hoping to re-experience them. Please leave a like. If you like the video, it helps the channel out immensely. Leave a comment letting me know what you thought about re-experiencing this chapter if you like. And I will see you back here probably tomorrow for more. Let's see how Larten reacts to the foreman. Hello and welcome back to Thoughts Per Chapter, House of a Dragon. No, wrong.